Pants on Fire is the 14th episode of the 3rd season of Everybody Loves Raymond. This is directed by Mackenzie, and as always there will be spoilers from now as I talk about the episode and share some thoughts. It's a decent episode, but not a lot happens, so there's not really a lot to cover, and there are a couple of moments, well, I guess one moment that I don't really love, but in general, it's fine. It starts off at Marie and Frank's, and we find out that it's almost Ray's birthday. And we also find out that Robert's little 1-year-old baby picture is not actually from a party. They just smeared chocolate on his face and took a photo. But when it was Ray's first birthday, he had an actual party. Marie, in her defense, does say that you learn. After having one child, you kind of get the chance to correct the mistakes you made with the first child by the time you have a second child. So at least she was aware that what she did wasn't very nice, or at least it kind of showed favoritism. And I admire her, I guess, for at least admitting her mistakes. She then cuddles up to Frank to basically get him to put the heat on rather than using his body heat because it's quite cold. Frank puts the heat on, something starts rattling, and they find a bottle cap in the system. And we find out that this was actually from a party. Ray had a party once when he was younger, when the family were at Florida, when Marie and Frank were in Florida. I was slightly concerned that this would be heavily a flashback episode, but actually it's not. We just get one very brief flashback, so I was quite happy with that. The flashback, kind of boring, didn't care for it, but it's fine. And Marie is outraged that Ray has been lying to her. And then we cut to Ray's birthday. Marie comes over, Frank comes over, Frank gives Ray the gift. Marie is ignoring Ray. She's not interested in him. And Frank points out that Ray was just rebelling like an average teenager, and Marie says there was nothing for him to rebel against. He had a nice childhood. And I feel like they could have done a bit more with this to make the episode a bit more interesting. Yes, he had a nice childhood, but I imagine there were ways that Marie treated him that maybe he wanted to rebel against. He was always seen as the golden child, and the child who could do no wrong, which is still largely the case. And they could have really lent into that a little bit more, and showing that actually you can smother a child into rebelling. You can make them seem like they're too perfect and they need to break out of that mold. And they could have done a bit more with that, but they didn't do that. And then we have bedtime with Ray and Debra, and Ray realizes he didn't get his birth minute kiss at 8:46 like he usually does, and it turns out it's actually something that's bothering him. So he goes over to Marie the next day to try and get over, to get on her good side, and then Robert comes over, and we get a kind of alternate universe where Ray is the one who's being ignored and Robert is getting all of the affection, and it's quite interesting to see. I did quite like that. And Marie has even baked Robert a cake for his first birthday to make up for the fact that he didn't have a proper party on his first birthday. And I thought it was rather good fun. Ray has left, and it's very clear that this is not something Marie and Robert do frequently, because they have a very awkward discussion about blouses, and there's a lot of silence in between talking about the blouses and the milk. And then I honestly I didn't buy into the last couple of minutes of the episode. I didn't believe it, and then I didn't really like the way it went. Robert says something. He basically says, would you have felt the same if it had been my party? And Marie thinks in that moment Robert is confessing that it was his party. And I feel like that's a bit of a stretch. I really don't think that was an acceptable reading into what he said. Maybe if they'd worded it differently, I would have believed that, but I didn't. But it's very clear also that Marie was looking for a reason to forgive her Raymond. So yes, I can understand that she read that into what Robert said, but I still feel like it was a bit of a stretch. And then, I did like this bit though, she leaves the house and then immediately rushes back in, and Robert just hands her the cake because he knows what's happening. The cake is going to Raymond for his birthday, and that's what happens. And she finds out, or Ray finds out rather, that Marie thinks the party was Robert's. It's very clear that it wasn't. I don't like the fact that Ray went along with it. I don't like the fact that he didn't correct her. Usually when Robert is cast aside, it's not Ray's fault. Marie is just favouring Ray. But in this moment, it was Ray's fault for not saying anything. and I didn't like that very much. And then Frank comes over and finds the cake has been moved, and that's basically it. And it just kind of falls a bit flat. I don't think it was a very satisfying ending. So the last few minutes, apart from Marie rushing back to get the cake, I didn't really care for. But the rest of it was okay. But clearly, it's not the most eventful episode. I definitely think they could have done a bit more with Ray having a need to rebel because he'd been raised as this golden child who could do no wrong, and he needs to break free from that. They definitely could have done a lot more. But what we got was fine. I didn't dislike the episode, and there were some good moments, but it's definitely not a personal favourite. I think that Pants on Fire is okay, but it could have been better.